Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking to you about using personal devices in the classroom. Now, for me, this was something that I had never really thought about. I was always told in school not to take your phone out, not to be on your computer, not to use your iPod, and so that always kind of deterred me from even thinking that it was okay to use personal devices in the classroom, which is definitely not true. After taking this course and reading about personal devices and how beneficial they can be in a classroom, it started to change my mind. And the one thing that I wanted to focus on first is, what is a personal device? Now, we probably all have one of these. It's a cell phone. And that is a personal device. But personal devices can range from everybody having a computer. That was something that I did have access to in high school. We were a one-to-one school, so everybody in my school had a laptop from when I was in a freshman until I was a senior. But personal devices can also be like a clicker, like an iClicker, if you've ever used one of those. Those are a personal device that are used in the classroom to answer survey questions, to take quizzes, to take poll questions. So for me, getting a grasp on even what a personal device was something that was kind of difficult for me because, like I said, in my classes, it was really frowned upon to even use your personal devices. But after taking this class and after discovering the different uses of personal devices, I've come to the understanding of how personal devices could be used in a classroom. Now, I do have some questions on personal devices that maybe some of you have been asking yourselves as well. The first question that I have is, what age is appropriate for personal devices? This is a tough question because I don't think that anybody has a specific answer for this question because it ranges by what we are using. We all know that there's been studies that say that screen time can be really negative for young kids and for kids in general and for humans in general. If we spend too much time on our screens, it can have negative effects on our eyes. It can have effects on our learning and how we process things, and on our attention spans. It's actually proven to lower attention spans by using too much screen time. And so for me, this was a huge question because I want to teach elementary school students, and I currently teach preschool. So is it okay for me to have personal devices in the classroom? Should I have personal devices in a classroom? Should students be on an iPad? Should they have a phone, quote unquote, that they can use to participate in something like an iClicker situation? So that was the main question that was raised for me, was what is appropriate for different ages. Now, as students get older, they're going to make their own decisions, and they're going to probably be on personal devices more and more because that's just where our society is headed. We're headed towards a more digital era, and part of me as an educator wants to provide access to technology for my students so they know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, if that makes sense. So if I can provide access to technology at an earlier age, they might begin to understand technology on a different level. I wasn't exposed to technology, one-on-one personal devices, until I was in middle school. I didn't get a phone until I was probably 13 or 14 years old. Now that's so different today because we are in a technological world. I've seen kids as young as 6, 7, 8 years old have a cell phone because their parents want them to have access to being able to communicate with them, being able to reach them if something goes wrong. But is that the line? Do we cut it off at you can only call? Do we allow them access to the internet? Because we all know the issues that can come with access to the internet. So that was a main concern when I started this lesson, was how do I incorporate using a personal device with kids being so young? And this is the conclusion that I came up with. I think that there's a time and place for using technology in the classroom. I think that students having access to a personal device is something that I would definitely recommend, and I would definitely work towards having in every classroom. If there was a cart of, let's say, iPads, and my students could check those out and use them for a specific lesson, that would be something that I would be really interested in my future classroom, because it allows them access to the technology without being reliant on the technology. And I think that's a line that I don't want to cross as an educator. I don't want my students to rely on technology to learn anything. I want the technology to be a support system in how they're learning, if that makes any sense. So when it comes to personal devices, the thing that I came up with for my classroom is using iPads. Now, granted, I have to have access to iPads. I have to have the funding to have iPads or be in a school system where this is allowed. But hypothetically, if I did have access to iPads as a personal device, I would use the personal devices for learning processes. You might be asking, well, obviously that's what you would be doing, because what else are you using the iPads for? Well, there's a lot of things you can do on iPads. But for me, with young students, I would want the iPads loaded with programs that would teach them the basics. This could be something as simple as matching colors. So maybe there's on one side of the screen, there's a red, a green, and a blue ball. And on the other side, there's a blotch of red and green and blue. And they have to draw with their lines to connect the matching colors. Yes, this could be done on a worksheet. Yes, this could be done on the board with me coloring. Yes, this could be done with me holding up crayons. But students are already intrigued by the technology. They want to use it. They're excited to use it. And that's something with personal devices that you can use as a benefit, because they already want to do it. They want to play the games. They want to log on, and they want to be touching the screens, and they want to be playing. And that's a huge benefit. If we can already have students excited about something, excited to use something, if students were excited to use a worksheet, then we would use worksheets all the time. But that's just not the case. Students are excited by technology. They want to use the newest and the brightest and the shiniest things that are out there, like an iPhone, like an iPad, like a smart board even. But when it comes to personal devices, this is something they can hold in their hand and they can use throughout the day. For math, for example, there's plenty of math, even worksheets that they can use on the iPad. They can do 2 + 2 = 4 and write it on the iPad, and that's much more interactive for them than me handing out a worksheet, me having it say 2 + 2, and they have to add to equal 4. So for me, personal devices are all about the interaction. It's all about student engagement and them being able to work with technology to support their learning. That's what I think is with personal devices. It's not using a personal device to replace learning. It's using a personal device to enhance the learning process. That's something that I've struggled with in this class in general, is how do I incorporate technology from gaming to a makerspace to all these different things. But for personal devices, this is something that was really hard for me because I just didn't do it. I haven't been exposed to it. I didn't use my laptop in high school to support my learning other than to type a paper. Teachers weren't saying, okay, take out your laptop, let's go to this site and explore this. That's not how it was. It's probably changed a lot since I was in high school. But for me, being with such young kids, I want them to be excited, and technology excites them in a way that will allow them to participate on a higher level. With personal devices, their individual learning can be so much more, because each student's iPad can be catered to their learning. Each student's iPad can focus on a different thing. Sally might be focused on her colors, while Jimmy is really interested in rocks, for example. That sounds really boring, but they're on 2 completely different pages. And for me, I can't cater to Sally and Jimmy in every single lesson that I do. But if we had personal device time, for example, and we were doing colors, I could relate that to Sally in a personal way on the iPad using a program, or to Jimmy in a personal way on his iPad using a rock program, or something like that. These are all examples that it takes time to plan how to upload all of these things, but the when we have access to technology and students have access to something that they can put in their hand, they can access so much more, and we can allow them to access so much more. Now, there has to be a line. We don't want them going off anywhere online, but if we can load programs onto the iPads or use apps that are available, technology apps, and there's a ton of them out there that can be loaded onto a personal device, then we can just enhance their learning. And that's what this is about. The technology supports the learning, not the learning supports the technology. The technology supports the learning. And I think that's something with personal devices that kind of scares people because they think it's a personal device, it's a phone. It's a personal device, they're going to go on Facebook for older students. Or it's a personal device, they could get lost out there because there's so much out there. We have to have a degree of control with personal devices in a classroom, in my opinion. We can't just let them go out on their own. We have to have standards and we have to show them what's right and what's wrong and what we're using them for. Not that they're just a game, but that they're supporting what they're learning. And I think now that I've gone through the lesson and I understand the idea of personal devices and how they can be used, I can see where there would be a huge benefit to using them in a classroom. There are concerns with using personal devices. Are they distracting? For some kids, they can be overwhelmed by technology. It can be difficult for them to use. It can be kind of scary because they're afraid to break it. At least my kids, even with simple toys, they're nervous that they're going to break it. But if we can teach them respect and caring about the devices and that it's a privilege to use the devices and that we can go back to going to a less fun way of learning, then I think students can see a real benefit in using the technology because that excitement in the technology is already a gateway to their learning process. If you go further into personal devices, you can do team building, you can do classwork by combining and doing everything together. So we could all log on to a math app and do something together or in pairs or in groups. That allows them to collaborate and things like that. But in my classroom with a personal device, what I want to see them do is support their own learning. So if Sally is struggling with math, then her personalized learning on her device would be more focused on math. So counting apps and more math apps and things like that can support her in that learning because that's what she's struggling with. Whereas another student could be struggling with writing. Writing skills on an iPad are huge because they can trace with their finger, which is a little bit different than writing with a pencil, but this is the gateway to how they hold a pencil. And we could even get an actual writing device for the iPad so they can learn how to hold the pencil the proper way and they can practice writing. So there's a lot of opportunities for personal devices. I was really closed off to the idea at first. And when I actually started the lesson, I was like, I don't even know how I'm going to discuss this because it's something that I just feel like is a complete negative. But for me to explore the different options and to even use my own iPad to explore different options, I've come to the realization that personal devices can be a real benefit and can be a huge support in the learning process. Like I said, I don't want my students to rely on the technology, but I want them to use the technology to expand on what they're learning. I want them to take the technology and use it in a way that helps them problem solve. It helps them critical think, all those higher order thinkings that we talk about in education. I want the technology to support them in those processes. So I think personal devices have a place in the classroom, and I think they can be a huge benefit.